Welcome to the Custom Tools Getting Started webinar. My name is Chris Cook. I'm the HAWKWARE Products Manager. This presentation will take roughly 60 minutes. I'll take you through our Getting Started resources, so where you can get help with configuring and installing and setting up custom tools. We'll actually go through a live custom tools installation, so you can see how that process works. And we'll work on setting up a basic profile. So the profile is your settings for how custom tools operates. So we'll look at batch operations, which are most common, things like batch convert, batch print. We'll look at some custom property setup, things like auto numbering and descriptions and some of the controls related to that. And then how we import data into the custom tools database to help it best leverage for those batch operations. First, I want to talk about the architecture just a little bit. Sometimes it's a misconception that custom tools is just a plugin for SolidWorks. And while on some level that is true, there is a client plugin for SolidWorks, which you'll do all your primary work in. It is actually a client server application with multiple components. So on the back end, there is a server component. It leverages SQL. You can use your existing SQL server if you have the client licenses for that. But the installer is about 0.5 gigabyte in size, which includes SQL Express. So you're free to use SQL Express as well. In addition to the SolidWorks add-in client, there's also a Custom Tools administration client. Both of these are activated independently through the web activation portal. Works very much the same as your SolidWorks activation does if you're using standalone SolidWorks licenses. If you use a network version of Custom Tools, then the only thing that's different about that is that you'll have a license manager to install. And it works, again, very similar to the SolidWorks license manager. Same idea. The license manager activates over the web with a serial number, and then it gives you access to a certain amount of floating licenses for the administration tool as well as the Custom Tools clients. So where do we find custom tools? I'm going to jump into a web site first. All right. To download custom tools, you'll go to the Custom Tools website, and that is customtools.info. From this website, at the top, you'll see a login button. And they'll have customers and resellers. So resellers is where we log in, create your licenses, manage your activations, your subscriptions, things like that. You'll go to the customer side, and that's where you'll download your software. Here I've already logged in, and what you'll basically see is a list of all of the products to download. Right? And they have old versions of Custom Tools all the way back through 2009. This is also where you'll look at any SPRs you may have submitted, kind of similar to SolidWorks, your tickets. You can look at your licenses and activations to see who has it installed and activated. You can't delete or cancel any activations from there, but you can certainly contact us, and we have the power to do that on our end. For 2018, Service Pack 0, 1, and 2 are available. We always recommend grabbing the latest build. It will work with any service pack of SolidWorks. Back through, I believe it's like 2015, and you can verify that on the help.customtools.info installation guide page. The version of SQL Express that comes with the installer does not include the tools. I may suggest this to them in the future to include that version. If you're familiar with Enterprise PDM or SolidWorks PDM Professional and the full SQL server that comes with that, it includes SQL Management Studio, which has a handy tool for managing logins and access to your databases and backing up databases and things like that. If you want that tool, you will need to go to the Microsoft website, and you can just search for it. You'll for SQL Express, and you'll see a link to it. And download the one that says SQL Server Express with tools. That will give you the Management Studio and any other tools that might be useful for working with that database. So when it comes to help with using and configuring and setting up custom tools, you have a number of resources at your disposal. If you're one of our customers, as far as SolidWorks subscription customers, you probably familiar with our support team already, but in our knowledge base, you'll have access to some custom tools resources in there, some tips and help on setting certain things up. Highly suggest you go check that out. If you're installing a network license, then I definitely suggest you check that out. There are some instances where the license manager won't automatically pick up the server name, and so it shows you where exactly to fix that to make sure that that activates properly. Once we have it installed, the help files have a whole huge tutorial section, right? And I encourage you to get familiar with that. What you'll see in a lot of them, and I'll show this during the live part of the presentation, is that a lot of them have videos, and there'll be a little video icon you can click on to go watch the video of that particular item. There's a fairly extensive YouTube channel for this tool. You'll see Custom Tools for SOLIDWORKS. Lots of videos in there. They're posting some of the webinars that they're doing recently. They try to do one about once a quarter or so. And so the most recent one is on PDF batch conversions and PDF merging. It's about a 17-minute video. So I encourage you to check that as well. Maybe bookmark it or subscribe to that channel. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. I've got the 2016 SP1 installer, the 64-bit already downloaded. You can see it's 507 megabytes. And we'll get that installing. Now, since I'm an enterprise PDM, SOLIDWORKS PDM professional user, I'm going to leverage the SQL server that I already have. So that part of my installation might be a little bit different than yours. You don't have to use the same SQL server. It's a completely separate product, so it's just all based on licensing for your SQL at your facility. Installation is just a wizard. We're going to accept the license agreement, put in our information as far as our serial number. You can get a demo here. You will need to enter the serial number with 4 digits. Then a space, then 4 digits, then a space, then 4 digits. That's the format that it needs. And the same is true of the website. If we are logged into our custom tools, we go to the customer login page. You'll put the company name, and the serial number that our order management team sends you. And you will need to put it in that format. If there's no spaces, it will tell you it's an invalid serial number. So just something to keep in mind. There's 2 installation types, trial and custom. Trial will install the server and client components as well as the database. So SQL Express will automatically install. It'll create a database for you to start with, and it'll create a sample profile. The sample profile, I'll show you where that is a really geared for Custom Tools Professional. The one most of you probably have is Custom Tools Basic. That's the one we add to your subscription. And so we're going to go through features in this presentation that are specifically for Basic. And I'll try to point out things that are professional so you can kind of differentiate one from the other. Just so you know what all these components are in the background, we're going to do a custom installation. So there's 3 sections, basically. We don't need any of the tools. Those are some legacy things that are there for long-standing customers that are moving forward. So basically, we got clients, servers, and languages, right? So install the language that suits you. For the client, by default, it selects everything, and we don't need everything. The viewer is a separate application that gets activated separately. We don't really sell those licenses unless there's a specific need and they're phasing them out. So we're going to turn that one off. We definitely want the SOLIDWORKS add-in, and we want the administration tool. We need both of them. Administration, we'll see, we use to set up our database and some users and groups if we want to manage profile access. And inside SOLIDWORKS, we have access to modify the profile itself. And there's options that exist in there that will only show up in there. They won't show up in the profile editor in administration. So we definitely need both. On the server side, it really depends where you're installing this and which components you need. So I need the server note at the top for sure. That's going to talk to my SQL Server. The database I only need if I'm installing SQL Express, and I need that database here locally. I don't in my case, so I'll leave it off. If you need to turn that on, it will prompt you for a password for the SA account, the system administrator account. Just enter that in and make sure you document that somewhere or however that's appropriate into your company. The custom tool service is really only needed for professional installations. That's a helper service if you're doing connections to external databases like an ERP or an outside SQL server. And then the license manager would be just for those installations that are a network license. This one is going to be a standalone, so I'm going to clear that one. So we just want the server, the administration, and the SolidWorks add-in. Hit next. Then I need to put in the database server name. So this is the name of the PC hosting SQL Server. And this is the name of my computer. If you're using instances or named instances, then you'll have to put a backslash in whatever the instance name is. This one doesn't. I'm using the default instance. And then you'll have to give it a connection account. I'm using SA. Now, SA is not necessarily the most secure account to use since it has pretty much God rights inside your server, your SQL server. So your system administrator account may want to set you up with one that you want to use. If you use the local user Windows authentication, remember that every user that logs into Custom Tools, it's going to pass those credentials to the server. If they don't have the sufficient rights to update the database, with their settings and activity, then it'll give them some issues. So you want to set up an account specifically for Custom Tools. I believe there's one that gets installed by default called CT_admin, and that is also the password that you can set with like DB owner rights to your Custom Tools. And then we'll finish the installation. Since I'm not installing SQL Express, the installation here will go fairly quickly. It takes a little longer to set up Express. It's not as long as full SQL Server, but certainly longer than just the base application itself. Once installed, you'll have some logs. You can look at the installer log. This is great if you run into problems. You want to check that and take a look at it. And then we can help troubleshoot the installation. You can look at the What's New documentation. They put one of these out for every service pack, so you can see what features are new or what enhancements or fixes were put in there. And then there's a fairly comprehensive Getting Started guide here as well. We're going to be going through most of that content here live as we're doing this presentation. So here's our Custom Tools administration on my desktop here. This is the client application that sets up the databases and some permissions and other things. So here I've got a database view on the left. Right, here's my server, right, the one we entered. That'll be my SQL server. I don't have any databases set up, so I'm going to create one. Again, launches another wizard. Give it a database name. I'm going to make that the active database. So any users connecting that will log in will be logging into that database. You can choose to create an example dictionary if you like. Usually it's a good idea to have one just as a sample to go back and review. Same with the profile. I'm going to go ahead and let it do those. And then we're going to go back and create an empty profile to build from scratch. But I'll allow it to put those in for now. So the profile name that it's going to create, I renamed it to default custom tools just so it would remind me. And the type is going to be machinery design. Later we're going to come back and create an empty one with nothing in it and start from scratch. But this gives me one that I can use as an example. I can go and look at how certain parts of custom tools are configured and how all the little moving pieces that are involved. So now I have a database and it's in bold, which means it's the active one. So I'm going to log into that database. This is usually one of the first questions that pop up. What's my login? It comes with a built-in user called admin that out of the box has no password. So I can just hit the login. Admin has access to everything, meaning that any of these profiles that I create, I can create as many as I like. Admin will always have full rights to. We have users and groups here set up so that for our profiles, we can set permissions. We can say which users can read the profile and see its settings, which ones can use it, right, and actually run the applications or the features set up in it, which ones can write to it or change the settings, which ones can change the permissions, right, and who can delete those profiles. So that's what these are used for. If you have a lot of users and you want to change your rights, then this is how you'll go about it. You'll notice that admin isn't included in either group. Admin always has full rights. So profiles have their own chunk over here of different settings. If I select the profiles node itself, I can create new profiles, I can import them. You can also select specific profile and you can export them. So if you want to send us your settings to ask us questions, that always helps. And then we can make tweaks and send it back to you and you can re-import it. You can rename them, you can duplicate them and make a new one. So if you want to use where you currently are and try out some new features in another profile, you can kind of duplicate it and do that. You can of course delete them. And then profile options, we're going to actually do in SolidWorks. I'll launch it here so we can see what it looks like. It looks the same in SolidWorks, but these are all of the settings for how the profile operates. And the reason that we're not going to do it here is that there are some settings that are important to us that are missing. One of those would be the file conversions. Right? There's no place here where I can go and set up my PDF outputs and things like that. So we'll do that inside SolidWorks. But basically we have things like our projects, our sequences, which would be our numbering schemes, custom properties, which has the bulk section here, and these are grouped, and we'll see those in the SolidWorks user interface and why they're grouped the way they are, and then all the properties that are controlled by them. Some of these are going to be professional, or specific to professional, especially these cut lists and sheet metal. Those are professional only options, the weldments. Same with these like COBOX, CNC tools, database search groups. These are all for professional settings. And with projects, the same is true. General settings will apply to everything. That will be there for basic as well. But all of the sub-projects, that's part of the project management part of professional. And we'll go through exactly what those do because they are pretty handy. All right, so I'm going to close this. We'll need to come back to it here in a few minutes. I'm going to open up SolidWorks. And after the initial installation, the add-in should be turned on, but if it's not, I'll go ahead and do that. Oh, doesn't look like it is. So I'll turn mine on. When the add-in's turned on, you'll get on the splash screen that same kind of login. So I'm just going to log in as admin and go over some of the basics for how Custom Tools shows up in your user interface. It has its own toolbar. You'll notice there's only a few things that are highlighted here. Some of the bulk operations are available. Import, of course, if we want to import data. The profile options. And then there's a copy, which is kind of a Custom Tools version of, say, Copy Tree or Pack and Go. On the right-hand side, there's two tabs for Custom Tools. There's one for the information about who your reseller is, are there new versions, how to contact us. Also the links to the social media resources for Custom Tools. That YouTube channel is linked in there. There's the help index, which is a great link here. This is all online help. And I'll bring this up because we can go to administration and you'll see tutorials. And anything that has a tutorial will have that icon next to it, meaning it's got a video that you can watch. So feel free to check all those out. Pretty handy. The next tab is the search tab. So with an empty profile, what we'll see is we only have the free search. So this searches the database for custom tools. So the only way that files get into the database is by either having the add-in turned on and creating new files and saving them, or importing. So we'll show some importing later in the presentation. And then that will search that the database. So you can filter on the document type if you like. If you're using projects, which project you're looking at. And then these fields are custom properties defined in this default profile that had a flag set to be visible in search. So it just creates a special search field. So free search will also search these fields, but by searching in here, it's going to limit it to just that particular property. Also in the tools pull down, you'll see a custom tools group. This was a 2015 change in the SolidWorks interface. The third-party applications no longer got their own pull-down menu. They had to be a submenu under tools. So it's just kind of cleaning up the UI a little bit and where things were. So in there, you'll see some of the same operations we have here. Options is where we control the profile. I'm going to look at the profile now. So there's a couple more tabs here that we didn't have from administration. Some general user options for how it deals with deleting files and some of the file operations. Like if you don't want custom tools to pop up when you hit save, you can clear that. You can have it tell it specifically to don't show it when you're saving virtual components or first-time models, things like that. And then the database options will be things like this list of attributes. We imported the sample database information. It prompted us during the install. These are all custom property names, all right, that are in the sample. So you're welcome to use them, add your own. We can kind of do that on the fly as well as if we're setting up the profile. So you don't necessarily need to worry about it here, but if you did want to remove some of these, you certainly could. Like there's one called address that's spelled wrong. We can delete it, right, and get rid of it from our database. If you're using professional and you're doing some translations, this is where you set up those languages. So we would set up, what it's called, and then these are the dictionaries that we might use. So if we pick one here, like custom tools, and hit contents. Yeah, here's one for description. These are the different languages. So that just establishes what those are, and you type in what the translation is. So it's not like a Google Translate where it's kind of doing it behind the scenes. You're creating the translation database to use with it. All right, so our focus today is going to be on this profile. And you'll notice down here is the file conversion. That was not there in the from the administration tool. So we have access to that here. Materials, I don't believe was there as well. Right. So if I start a new part, what a profile gives me is access to go to my custom tools toolbar here, this properties. If I click that, any properties I've set up will show up here under groups. Right? We can control whether these groups are hidden or not, whether they're collapsed or expanded, depending on different criteria. And you'll see some of them are in red, which means that they're set to mandatory. So if I tried to hit OK here, it says, hey, these two properties, drawing number and description 1, are mandatory. Right? I can cancel out of custom tools, but I can't hit OK because that's going to trigger some other activities. Right, so we're going to go set those up on our own. I'm going to close that one without saving. I close SolidWorks. I'm going to go back to administration. Log into my database. And I want to create a new profile. And I'm going to set this to empty. I am going to leave this set profile active on, so it's going to become bold instead of default. And that simply means that users logging into SOLIDWORKS, logging into this Custom Tools webinar database, will be using this profile. That's what the active means. And now, since I turned the add-in on and told it to stay on, I should get a pop under. You'll notice it pops under the splash screen here. Just click on it somewhere and it'll come to the top, and then you'll log in. If you hit remember me, it won't show you this again. And there's a place in the registry where you can kind of clear it out if you need to bring it back. I think there's a knowledge base article on how to do that. All right, so here's our custom tool search, and you notice those other properties are no longer here, right? Because we don't have any properties to work with. So we'll go to options and we'll set some up. So to start with the properties, I'm going to go down to this custom properties node, and we have models and drawings. So anything that's part of our assembly is going to be under models, and then drawings will be managed separately. All of our properties need to be in a group. So the first thing I need to do is add a group. I'm just going to have one. We'll call it general. And you can see you can control whether it's collapsed, whether it remembers the last state. And then so you have advanced options to decide if it's visible based on values of other properties. So in case you have different numbers or descriptions or special fields for things that are, say, purchased versus built, you can actually group them that way and hide and show them based on those property values. So if I select this group and hit add, I'll create a new property. So I'm going to put one in called number. I'm just going to work with two properties in this presentation to keep it simple. We have different options for the type. Check boxes, combo boxes, a list, right? Dates and dimensions. We can actually link to your model dimensions. Editable lists, actually tiered, like hierarchical combo lists. So these are, again, multi-tiered relational lists that you can either show in one big list, or you can actually break out into levels and have them linked in, so they intelligently change the different levels as you select. Pretty powerful stuff. Use an edit box in here. You have some control over where that property value goes. I'm going to keep it in the document properties, but you certainly could push it to configurations, active ones. You can push it to both document properties and the active configuration, and all configurations. You have options of whether it's a part or an assembly. So if you have a special property for an assembly number versus a property number, I don't know why you'd want to track them differently, but you're certainly welcome to. You can change the scope here. You can make it read-only. So if it's a reading in values, you can make it required. And you'll notice if it's required, it can't be hidden. But you can also have hidden properties, which are good if you're like auto-populating them and using them in other what we call combination properties, where you concatenate them into a longer string. We'll come back to the functions. There's different functions depending on the different types of property you use. We're going to use a button function a little later and tie this to a serial number, and this is what they're calling a sequence. If we're using professional and tying to a database, this is where we would tell it which are the search groups we've defined that we want to use, and then what column we're using out of that search group. And this checkbox here is how we get this property to show up in its own little box over here. So I'm going to enable that just so we can see it. We have some additional options. If you're using professional, you have the option of copying these properties to the drawing, which is pretty handy. In the case of a number, there are certain fields where you may want to clear them when you're doing a save as. So that I'm going to turn that on for this. Also going to save the value in uppercase. The user doesn't have to worry about capitalization. And then the track history, you won't need that if you're using a PDM system, but it just creates kind of numbered versions of your properties. So I'd have a number number 1, number 2, number 3 as it changed throughout time. It's just kind of one way to track it, but if you're using PDM, again, you won't have to deal with that. Then you have some options under miscellaneous. In the print and convert, you have options for changing a value at print time. So if you're going to put things like, job number or build number or, something that's specific at the time of printing, you can create one of these properties and display that in the print and convert and actually change that, enable the changing here of the value in the printing. This allows you to use it for filtering and searching basis, right? If you're trying to sort, so maybe you have a built versus purchased things, and you want to select them differently for different types of operations. So we'll hit next. You can set default values for any of these properties, and you can use it do it as a user level or group level. And there's some links to the SolidWorks mass property information here too. Some pretty common things that we might put in a property. And we hit finished, and it will put number there. I'll go ahead and add one more while we're here for description. I'll let that be an edit box again. Again, also document properties. Not going to make it read-only this time. No button functions to put in there. I'll go ahead and add it to search just so we can see that there. And then save that in uppercase. Now you can drag these if you want to reorder them. And then to get all of this to update, we just hit OK. So that will go down to the search, and now there's our model fields. Again, it'll have drawings as a separate thing, and you can collapse or expand them. There's our number, and there's our description. So if I create a new file, it's going to create a new part, and then we'll go ahead and give it some geometry so that when it comes time to do the drawing, it'll actually have something to put in the drawing view. Okay. So now to get to the custom tool settings, go to the toolbar and then hit properties, the one on the far left. It's always the first one on the list. We'll leave all the actions alone. The default is to just show these properties to allow you to change them. If you're doing project management, like in professional, you can also assign it to a specific project at that point. So there's number and there's description. You'll notice number is red. So again, if I try to hit OK, it's not going to let me do anything until I actually fill it out. So I'll just throw a number in there. And here you can see the all caps here in my description. Now if I hit OK, it's still part 1, but if we look at the properties, we can see there's our description and there's our number. Right? So those are now part of our model. Now it'd be nice if this number was actually a number that incremented. So we'll make that change. Go back to the profile, and we'll go to sequences. Now sequences are basically like serial numbers and Enterprise PDM or PDM Professional. Same idea here. We'll just add one, give it a name. I'm going to give this one CAD files. You can tell it what the minimum value or kind of the start value is, what the maximum value is, what the next value is. You can have it kind of skip ahead. Format can be any string value, and then you've got some number counters. You can use different properties in conjunction and kind of concatenate them into a long string. So if you have a kind of a smart part number that's got a bunch of components to it, maybe some commodity codes and department codes, things like that, you use the combination properties to bring those together. So you'll first have to start with the model properties set each component of that string to its own property, and then use the combination properties to put them together, and then create one more property to point to the combination. Right? That's kind of the basic process there. Now what's nice about these is that if I've got a set of prefixes, say I just have a simple one like a commodity code plus a number, any of those prefixes, it will track, or it has the option here of using this project-specific sequencing to track the counter values independently for every prefix. So I would just then point to my commodity code property that I would have set up in here to tell it use that. And so for every value of that, it keeps track of this counter value. So that's pretty handy. It's something we don't actually have in Enterprise PDM. So that can be a big help for SolidWorks. I'm going to put a prefix in here. And then we can put a start value anywhere we want. Let's say the next value is going to be at 500. Notice that changes the min value. If we want to set a maximum value, we can. Maybe the max value is going to be at 90,000. You have the option of rolling back values. So if you created a series of models and then some of them didn't go anywhere, and so you just deleted them from the database in your file system, those numbers would then become available. And by turning this on, you'll have the option of going back and reusing those old unused numbers. So we'll keep that sequence. Then we'll go back to the model properties. We'll go to number and edit it. You can double click it, right click it, or just select it and hit edit. And we're going to leave it as an edit box and number, but this time we're going to use a button function. So we're basically adding a button to it and telling that value to go get a code. The get code, we'll hit next a couple of times here, will take us to a sequence. And so it'll list any sequences that we've created. And we can decide which sequences are appropriate for this particular property. So we may have more than one. Like you may have one that's different for parts than for assemblies. So you may want both of those to be available here. There's another place that we can set a default and tell it which one to use based on whether it's a part or an assembly. I'm going to go ahead and leave this set to all sequences for now. And then hit finish. If I hit OK, now what happens is we go to properties again inside SolidWorks. We've hit our number button, right? That's new. Shows which sequence we have, or we get a drop list and select any one we want. And there's the next code. So the unused codes would be for any that we needed to fill in that maybe we deleted. We'll hit OK, and that creates the next code. But now we'll notice that it still says part 1, right? We haven't renamed the file or anything. All we've done was set the properties. Right? So we've got a new property for the right part number. So we go back to our profile settings. We set the automatic naming in projects, right? And in basic, we only have general, so we can just do it kind of globally for everything. So this is broken up into the settings and then the default values. So for settings, this is where we set the file name. Does one of the properties that we've defined need to be the file name? And there's a separate section for drawings versus models. So I want to use the number as the file name. There's a checkbox here if we want to distinguish between parts or assemblies. So if we have a different property we want to be used for parts, then this one would then apply to assemblies. We don't, so there's one for both. We can set a save folder. So on my desktop, I've got a webinar directory, and I want my models to be saved in here. That opens up the option of allowing users to save somewhere else. I'm going to clear that so it does it automatically. If I'm doing a save as and creating something, or I change the value of number, do I want to demand the renaming? All right, in this case I do. If something's in a design library, you can skip it. For drawings, they take the reference model name. That's kind of the default behavior. And in this case, that will work because we're naming the file, the number, so it makes sense to have the drawing the number too. And then we can set a separate save location. So inside my webinar directory, I've got a drawings folder. So that does the naming and the saving. Now, if I wanted to automatically increment or place a value in a specific property, that's what these default values are for. So if I go to default values for parts, there's numbers tied to a code. So I do this just like as if I were a user. I pick on the box to pick my code. I only have one, but this is where if parts needed a different number than assemblies, I would select the part sequence and hit OK. Then I would go to assemblies, do it again, and pick the assembly sequence. Right? I only have the one that works for both, so I don't need to do anything there. We haven't set any properties for drawings, so there's nothing to set there. I'll hit OK. I'll go here. I'm not going to really change anything. Just going to hit OK. And you notice what happened. Right? There's our number, 5001. Look at our properties. There's our number. It all matches. If we look at the file and find references, what we'll see is that we've now stored this in the models directory. Didn't ask me where to save it, it just did it. So if I make a drawing of this, and I hit save, I'm going to go to my file and my find references, and I can see that my drawing is saved in the drawings folder. Again, it didn't prompt me. So that's where Custom Tools is interrupting the save process and making sure that it matches the rules set in our profile. All right. So that's how the the basic properties work in that settings. I want to jump into a little bit of import. First, you'll see this import icon, and this is how we can get additional data into our vault. If we look at the search now, I don't have to put anything in here. I can just hit OK, and that will search everything. The only thing in our database right now are those two files. Right. So by saving them, or just by hitting the OK in the properties pane, it's already committed them to the database. So again, database just stores the information about the files, the references and the properties. So if I want to bring in more files, I'll go to import. I can add files or add a folder. If I have a large assembly open and I want to grab that assembly, all of its components drawings all at once, I can add the active document, and that will go try to find everything. And then we would hit import and convert. In my case, I'm going to add a folder. I'm going to go into my webinar. I've got a couple of folders I want to add. I'm going to add this blade shaft, and then I'm also going to add the box. So that found all those files, extracted their references, and now hit import and convert. And that walks through them one at a time, uploads all that metadata into the database. So now if we do search, all those files now exist here. You see I've got a box drawing there. If I select it, it just opens. So it's a very fast way to find things. Right? It knows where they are, but doesn't necessarily need me to go tell it where to look. So from search, we can do things like let's look for assemblies. Right. So I have two. I have my blade shaft and my lid. If I select one, let's select the box with the lid. Right. I can do prints and converts. So if I want to batch convert all of the models to a certain format, all the drawings to a format, I can do that directly from search. Now we haven't configured any. So if I say I want to do a print and convert, If you do selected file, it will only do the assembly. If we do the BOM of selected file, it will give me the tree. So I don't have any print options yet. I don't have any convert options yet. All I have are some overwrite property values, and we didn't set any of those. But you can see the tree structure shows up. There's the assembly. There's the assembly's drawing. There's the box lid and the box itself. If they had drawings, those would show up there as well. Or actually, there's the box and its drawing, and then the box assembly and its drawing. So we have two. So we need to add some settings to allow us to do that. So we'll start with the convert. File conversions are probably the simplest. If you've done any file conversion tasks inside PDM Professional, pretty similar to what we do here. I'll start with a PDF. Let's apply this only to drawings. And then our file types are all our output options. Right? It should be the same as all the ones we have in SOLIDWORKS. I'll click PDF. I can tell it where do we want to save this. So I've got a bunch of options. I can put in things, properties in there in the string. So if I've got specific codes that are going to determine where it gets saved, that's all part of the string setup. I'm going to browse for a folder, and instead in mine, I've got a PDF folder in my webinar directory. And then as far as the name goes, I'm going to use the source file name. But again, you could build it from different model properties. It could be the number plus the description, or configurations, what sheet number it is, quantities, date and time stamp, anything you'd like there. If you want the user to pick a place to store it at runtime, you can turn this on. Otherwise, it doesn't ask them, and it puts it here every single time. Since we're dealing with drawings only, go to the Drawings tab here. You have options for how the sheets are dealt with. So if you're using some sheets for DXF output, right, that are just flat patterns, they have no title block, not something you necessarily want to put in the PDF, you can exclude them. You can say, I want something that's not. And we use the % as our wildcard. Right. So this does not have DXF anywhere in its sheet name. And then do I want all the sheets for a particular drawing to go into the same target file? You can have the rule execute after it saves in SOLIDWORKS. Sometimes that's important to make SOLIDWORKS do a save first. And then if you want to open the folder in Explorer to the output directory, you have some options there. Now this is fairly straightforward as far as it's the same as what you're used to in EPDM. What is unique here to custom tools, one, obviously being able to put the properties in there. You can do that in EPDM, but here it's a little more straightforward. But under conversion options, we've got merge PDF documents here, something that we can't do in EPDM. So if I want to take all of the drawings that I convert in one particular batch and put them in the same document, that's what this does. So I would typically make a separate convert rule for the merge versus the individual PDF. But that's here, and you're welcome to use that in basic as well as professional. Again, that's just a special value here to custom tools. I'll hit OK. Let's add another one. Make one for step for parts. Just like before, pick our options. Which version of step do you like? Where do you want it to go? I've got one for step files here. Give it the source file name. And then which configurations do you want? I'm going to leave this as to the last active and hit OK. So now we've got some conversion options. If I hit OK, let's go to our search and look for assemblies again. Now if I select this box with lid, do our BOM, convert, now I've got batch conversion options. And if I select PDF, it looks for drawings. If I pick step, it looks for parts. So we'll have a similar option here for print. We go to our profile settings again, and this time we go to print properties. So print's set up by profiles, and each of those profiles then have print settings. So the settings are like the rules that it uses to decide how it gets printed. So you might have multiple profiles because you've got users at different locations that have access to different printers, or you might have a special profile for printing to the shop floor or to manufacturing versus printing in engineering. So it may be determined by the destination of where you're going to send these files. So I'll create one. I'm just going to call it standard. And then which sheets do you want? So you can build some rules into the sheets to start with. So again, just like we saw before, we have the not conditions and or. So if you wanted to say, well, I do not want to print anything with DXF in it. Let's get the right symbol in there. Here we are. Then it will exclude any DXFs. Then with that standard set, default would be any default drawing sheets that don't match any of their other properties. Assembly and part would be if we're actually printing it directly from the assembly or the part. So for the default, I'm going to edit that. No settings here because again, this is the fallback condition. Which printer do I send it to? What paper size do I use? And then what orientation do I use? So again, that's kind of the fail-safe. Now for new rules, we can either go by sheet format or sheet size. So the sheet format is the one that's embedded in each sheet. Remember, it's not linked back to the original location where that sheet format came from. It's always embedded in the sheet. So if I pick one, let's say I go here and I pick my A landscape HAWKWARE. If that's not the one that's assigned to my sheet, then it doesn't fit the rule. Or if the one assigned in the sheet doesn't exist in my sheet formats location and it can't find them, then it doesn't match the criteria for the rule. So just keep that in mind. You may need to, if it's a customer file or something that you're referencing, you may need to save that sheet format out to your location so it can find it to do the matching. Then we say next, and again, pick our printer and select our options. And you can create as many of these as you want. So if you want to do it by sheet format, that's fine. If you want to kind of do a sheet size option instead, maybe A landscapes are always going to go to this printer and that size, you can do the same thing. So you can do it by size or by format. Kind of your choice, and you can do both. And again, if it doesn't meet any of these rules, then it falls back to default. So now if I hit OK, and we do our search again, go back to our assemblies, select our box of lids since it's got drawings, and again I want to do the balm. Here's our print profile. So it's now on top. You can switch between printing, conversion, anytime you want. You can actually run them all at the same time. So I could do PDF outputs, step outputs, and run print rules all at the same time. Now I don't really want to run the print rules, but during the presentation, but I'll go ahead and do the conversions. You also want to see that for overwrite property values, had we set any of those to be runtime values, we could change them here. So if you wanted a job number or a build number or something like that, you could do it. There's options in there for using the quantity, so that if I said I'm going to build 15 of these, right, it aggregates the quantities there for me, so I could put that build quantity on my drawing at print time. So something to be aware of. And under additional options, this is where we can decide, do I want to save these files after I do this or not? Do I want to add that quantity? right? I do need a place on the drawing to actually reference quantity. We can do translation if you're using professional, or there's these sheet format actions. So that's another place in the profile where you can set it up to swap out a sheet format, either reload one that's with the same name, just to update it because you changed added some new fields or changed the logo or part of a merger, that kind of thing, or you can just replace it. So we've had some customers that used it to replace their own sheet formats with a customer requested sheet format, and then print a PDF, but left the save turned off. Right, so that preserves it as their original format, but it creates a PDF of it with the swapped out format. So you can do that too, kind of as a batch operation. So it saves the user needing to do it, on a sheet by sheet basis. All right, so I want to thank you all for joining us. If you have any more questions about custom tools, how to configure it, feel free to contact us. Again, you can search our website on our knowledge base for custom tools. There's a getting started page with some videos as well. Good luck.